The 1979 NASCAR season was the most important season in NASCAR history. There are a lot of amazing years and a lot of incredible things happened in this sport over its history. And I bet when people went to Riverside for that first race, they had no idea how important that year was going to be. Even learning about USAC and sort of how open wheel kind of had been fractured somewhat, I didn't even think about that, and how that sort of opened a door of opportunity for other forms of motorsport like NASCAR. You have this sort of small crack of opportunity, and then this snowstorm on the East Coast that has everybody stuck in the house. The first flag-to-flag coverage of the Daytona 500 on a network television. You had, 3 channels? I mean, every third house on the street at least was on the Daytona 500. They had 16 million or something people watch that race. And so it was just this perfect sort of scenario. All the dominoes set up perfectly and all fell perfectly. And Dad's having his very first year. Dad's a rookie. And we know what kind of career he had. The King, Richard Petty, is winning the Daytona 500, and Cale Yarborough's trying to win his 4th championship in a row, and you have Jaws, Darrell Waltrip, just, so many cool things happening all at once, which is makes this year not only fascinating but just incredibly important for NASCAR. I can't think of anything that did more to grow the sport, expand the sport, introduce the sport to more people than that year. That Daytona 500 certainly is a key moment in the season, but you capture everybody's attention with that early big moment, and I think we've hung on to those fans ever since, right? And that race gets so much publicity because, and rightly so, that it overshadows a lot of what happened that year, right? And a lot of the incredible stories that I've been able to uncover kind of lay hidden underneath the shadow of the Daytona 500. And so that's been fun, really, to sort of peek behind the curtain a little bit further and learn the rest of the story, about that year. The rookie class from 1979, some say it's the deepest or the most stout rookie class in NASCAR history. And you had Dad, Terry Labonte, Harry Gant, and then there's Joe Milliken. And let's remember, when the season begins, all of these rookies don't know where the next don't know where the next opportunity is coming from. They have, Dad's got a full-time ride, but nothing is promised to any of these guys. Dad doesn't feel rooted, established. Harry Gant certainly doesn't. And as we would learn, Harry Gant would find himself in many different cars throughout the year and even miss races because of the uncertainty, right, of the times for all of those guys. It was a deep rookie field, but they were all just lucky to be able to get to the next race or even finish the year in the same car. Terry Labonte, who would become a 2-time champion, has a modest season. He doesn't set the world on fire. Dad has a win at Bristol, but gets injured, misses a few races. He has some low moments, some really curious finishes. We go to short tracks and they just can't even get it together. He makes a bunch of mistakes. It's really out of character, to the Dale Earnhardt that we all know today. And then there's Joe Milliken. There's this guy, Joe Milliken, that I don't think anybody thought was a threat. And he would be the one, actually, that Dad would have to beat for the rookie title. He would be Dad's toughest competition. Joe got very lucky to get into a car that was vacated by Benny Parsons, but that car had a reputation of finishing every race, never falling apart, and being absolutely consistent as it could be. And so Joe actually does a really, really good job of just taking advantage of an opportunity presented to him. He finishes all, when Dad's making mistakes, spinning out, crashing, cars breaking, Joe's right there to finish 7th, finish 8th, get those rookie points week after week after week. He's outrunning Gann, he's outrunning Terry Labonte. And then when Dad gets hurt, Dad falls behind in this rookie battle and has to come back and fight his way back into this rookie battle, and it goes all the way down to the very last race. And heck, I even think that Joe Milliken actually finishes ahead of Dad in the points. And so how does Dad win the Rookie of the Year? Well, there was the points that they would earn that was completely separate from the championship, but then there was also a 3-person panel that would vote at the end of the year. And so, you had to factor that in as well, how they would vote for or against you. So even though maybe Dad might have more points, if it was close, that panel was going to make the decision. I think this also was a tricky situation for Darrell Waltrip in 1973. He lost the Rookie of the Year to Lenny Pond. And when you compare the two careers, you'd absolutely say Darrell Waltrip was that, had the Hall of Fame career, but lost the vote to the panel at the end of 73. So you just never knew how that was going to go. And it hung in the air till the very last lap of the last race. I'm going to tell you about Rod Osterlund. He was the car owner for Dad in 1979 and 1980 and half of 1981. And he was a Californian that had made a bunch of money in real estate, and he had a successful business on the West Coast. We wanted to get into motorsports, wanted to get into NASCAR, and so he buys what is left of the Penske operation. So Roger Penske had the number 2. Dave Marcus was his driver, and Roger's going to get out of NASCAR for a bit. He would come back in briefly, and then ultimately, obviously, he's been in NASCAR for many decades since. But around 1977, he's going to sell his team to Rod Osterlund, and Rod buys it, but he keeps Dave Marcus as the driver. So they run the entire first year in 1978, and they have a great season. I think Rod was interested in fielding more than one car. He wanted to have more opportunities to win races, and if he had 2 cars on the racetrack, that was giving him a chance to win more races. So he was looking for drivers, looking for opportunity, taking advice from different people about how to get more and more involved in NASCAR. And luckily, he was introduced to my dad, and Dad was a prospect on his list, right? And Dad started getting some opportunities to drive for Rod in the Sportsman Series, and then ultimately ran a race at the end of the 1979 season. Fortunately for Dad, those opportunities went well. And I think Rod got really excited about Dale Earnhardt driving his race cars. And so from what I can tell, Rod was a very well-mannered, soft-spoken, smart, level-headed, calm businessman. And there's opportunities to hear him speak. He gets interviewed during the Daytona 500 multiple times throughout the year. In these articles, you get to read quotes from Rod about how the season's going, and he just seems like he'd be an easy guy to race for. I've always had this sort of tinge of sadness about him selling the team, right? Ultimately, in 81, he ends up selling the team and getting out of NASCAR. He comes back a handful of years later in the late 80s for a brief period of time. But I always wondered, they win the Rookie of the Year, and then they go in the 1980 and win the championship. What could have been if they had they had Dad had a 5-year contract. What if Rod had stayed around and stuck it out? I wonder what that would have meant for Dad's career. But yeah, I never heard Dad say a bad word about the guy. And from all I can tell and what I can tell, the people that knew him and reading about him in these articles and hearing his own quotes, I have an appreciation for him. Hey, if you like that video, like and comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss another piece of Dirty Mo Media content.